We have managed to do that, one, of course, keeping in mind all these factors of turbulence that I spoke about, but also keeping in mind that it's today a very polarized world. So if one looks at not just the COVID and its impact and the conflict and its impact, but also great power competition and how that makes straddling the global stage so much more challenging than it would. At this moment, I would say really, and I'd be happy to respond to that in greater detail, I think you can see that our relations with the United States is doing exceptionally well. We, I think, have really had the most productive prime ministerial visit in our history. If you look at the outcomes, one part of it is, yes, it's a state visit. Yes, it's the first time an Indian Prime Minister has addressed US Congress twice. But put all that aside, if one just looks at the solid outcomes for the visit and at the level of cooperation today in different domains, in business, in defense, in even in civil society, in terms of the flow of people, the areas like space, the scientific projects. I mean, there's really a long list here of practical achievements. And again, as someone who actually was with Ambassador Shamsaran in 2005, when I look back at these 18 years, I think we were earlier in a stage where we were trying really to address the obstacles of the relationship. Today, again, for a combination of reasons, we have moved into the positive domain. We are really looking at what is it that the two countries can do together in terms of not just bilaterally, but also in terms of how we can influence or shape the world together for our common purpose. If I were to today compare this with, when I say the big stage, with Europe, again, the attention which has been given to Europe over the last 9 years has really been remarkable. And it's been the big countries of Europe, it's been the smaller ones, it's the sometimes in groupings. But if you take any measurable metric of how you evaluate a relationship, again, I would suggest to you that the European relationship is doing well. There are, of course, a lot of possibilities there still to be realized. I think the big issue before us is concluding the free trade agreement. But all I can say is we are obviously much more hopeful than we have been in the past. Now, moving from Europe, the relationship with Russia. This relationship has been held steady, kept steady, despite all the turbulence in the world. So it is actually for us a very unique relationship, I think in some ways for the Russians also. And in this period, for all the pressures on us, I think we have made our own evaluation of the importance of this relationship. And I do want to say that, sometimes this relationship is dumbed down to things like, oh, we are dependent on them for arms. I think it's far more complex than that. There is a geopolitical logic for what we are doing, what we have been doing with Russia. And today, many things which we were working on even prior to 2022, which is how to expand our economic cooperation, those have borne fruition. So you actually have an upswing in the economic part of the relationship with Russia, even as you have very steady politics and continuing security cooperation. The difficult one on the big stage has obviously been China, and I would say it's a subject on which I have spoken publicly before. At the end of the day, for us, we recognize it's a neighbor, it's a big neighbor, it's today a very significant economy and significant power. But at the end of the day, any relationship has to be based on a high degree of mutuality. There has to be a respect for each other's interests, sensitivity for each other's interests. And there has to be an adherence to agreements which were reached between us. And it is that departure from what was agreed between us which is today at the heart of the difficult phase that we are passing through with China. And the bottom line there is, at the end of the day, the state of the border will determine the state of the relationship, and the state of the border today is still abnormal. Now, all of that I really put in terms of the first achievement, which is the global stage. But there are three factors at the global level which I think you should all keep in mind as well. One, that we are not just playing politics at the global level. We are also shaping the global economy, and we are actually building our own economy as a consequence of that. And that building of the Indian economy today has to factor in the opportunities that arise from competitive geopolitics. That if you look at global companies today, a lot of global companies are making choices which are through a geopolitical lens, and that today gives us possibilities which may not have existed earlier. The second is that particularly after COVID, there is a search in the world for more reliable supply chains, more resilient supply chains, more redundant supply chains. There is discomfort with relying on a single geography, what you call economic over-concentration. And here too, there are opportunities. And in the digital domain, there is a growing concern about transparency and trust. So where your data lives, where your data is harvested, where your data is processed, all of these matter. So if you look at the digital world, at the supply chain world, at the larger investment patterns which are today being influenced by geopolitics, that too is part of the big stage. And some of that I think you could see as an influence over the outcomes which we got during the Prime Minister's visit. Now, and of course, from our side, we've made it significantly better for ourselves by improving the business climate in this country, by building the infrastructure, etc. But that's something I will talk about later. The second change is in regard to the neighborhood. And you saw that actually on the first day that Narendra Modi became Prime Minister. The idea of inviting all the leaders of our neighborhood to the oath-taking itself was a divergence from our political traditions, certainly from the way the neighborhood saw itself and saw us, and how we saw the neighborhood. Now, over these 9 years, we have pursued relentlessly what we call the neighborhood first policy. The neighborhood first policy essentially means